The fields of Flanders. A land soaked in the blood of thousands of soldiers, it became one of the most recognizable symbols of the First World War. A hilly area in northern Belgium and France, where in 1917, one of the bloodiest battles of the century unfolded. Here, amidst these low hills and fertile plains, the armies of four powers clashed in a struggle for control over strategic heights. Every meter of this land was priced in dozens of human lives. Flanders became a place where war showed its true face, merciless and inhuman. Incessant rains turned the fields into a boundless sea of mud, where machinery became useless and people drowned in the liquid earth. The heights of Passchendaele, Messines, Polygon Wood, these names forever entered military history as places of incredible courage and terrible losses. For the British, control over the Flanders Heights opened the way to Belgian ports, from where German submarines terrorized trade routes. For the Germans, these hills were the last line of defense before the plains of northern Europe. The Battle of Flanders became not just a military clash, it transformed into a symbol of human resilience in the face of unbearable trials. By 1917, the map of Europe had already been redrawn with bloody front lines. But it was Flanders that became the region where the clash of interests of the warring powers reached its climax. Why did this small stretch of Belgian and French territory acquire such critical importance in the eyes of military strategists? The answer lies in its unique geographical position and terrain. Flanders is not merely a plain, but a system of low but strategically important hills, control over which opened up opportunities for observation and adjustment of artillery fire for tens of kilometers around. The British command, led by Field Marshal Douglas Haig, saw in the Flanders operation a chance to break through the German defenses and reach the Belgian coast. Of particular importance were the ports of Ostend and Zeebrugge, bases for German submarines that inflicted devastating blows on the maritime communications of the British Empire. Every sunken transport meant the loss of valuable cargo and human lives. By the summer of 1917, German submarines had sent over 6 million tons of Allied ships to the bottom, a figure that forced the British Admiralty to seek any means of neutralizing the submarine threat. On the other hand, the German command perfectly understood the strategic value of the Flanders Heights. The Germans had created here a deeply echeloned defense system, including concrete bunkers, multi-tiered trenches, and extensive minefields. The landscape features of Flanders made this territory ideal for defensive operations. Numerous streams and canals crisscrossing the area easily turned into insurmountable obstacles with the slightest damage to drainage systems. The low-lying nature of the territory meant that groundwater was close to the surface, and this, combined with clay soil and frequent rains, turned the fields into impassable swamps at the first artillery bombardments. The military-political situation at the beginning of the Battle of Flanders was not in favor of the Entente. The Russian army was exhausted after the unsuccessful June offensive. French troops had barely recovered from mutinies after the disaster of the Nivelle offensive, and the Italians were bogged down in battles on the Isonzo River. Britain was the only force capable of delivering a serious blow to the enemy in 1917. Despite the doubts of many politicians and military figures, including Prime Minister Lloyd George, Haig insisted on carrying out a large-scale operation in Flanders. He believed that a concentrated strike on a narrow sector of the front would allow them to break through the German defenses and change the nature of the war, restoring mobility to the Western Front. On the 7th of June, 1917, at 4:10 in the morning, a deafening roar shattered the silence of the Flemish hills. 19 giant mines laid by British sappers under German positions on the Messines Ridge exploded simultaneously. The explosion was so powerful that it was heard even in London, 300 kilometers from the front line. Thus began the Battle of Flanders, one of the bloodiest battles of the First World War. In the initial hours of the offensive, British troops operated with astonishing efficiency. Stunned German soldiers, those who survived the monstrous explosions, could not offer serious resistance. By noon, the first line of German defense was breached on a front nearly 15 kilometers wide. Australian and New Zealand units operating on the left flank of the offensive advanced 3 kilometers, an unprecedented success by the standards of trench warfare. General Herbert Plumer, commanding the 2nd British Army, triumphed. His meticulously planned strategy worked flawlessly. Months of preparation, during which sappers dug tunnels under German positions, laying tons of explosives, had borne fruit. However, the joy of the British command was short-lived. By the evening of the first day, the Germans began to transfer reserves, and their artillery opened hurricane fire on the captured positions. On the second day of the offensive, the weather sharply deteriorated. Torrential rains, characteristic of Flanders, turned the fields into a sea of mud. British artillery, attempting to advance to support the infantry, became stuck in the waterlogged ground. Tanks, a formidable new weapon on which great hopes were placed, proved almost useless in these conditions. The German command quickly recovered from the initial shock. General Siegfried von Bülow, commander of the German forces in this sector, skillfully organized counterattacks. German machine gun crews, sheltered in concrete pillboxes that had withstood even the artillery bombardment, mowed down the advancing waves of British infantry. By the 10th of June, it became evident that Haig's original plan required serious adjustment. Instead of a swift breakthrough and an advance to the Belgian coast, the British found themselves once again embroiled in a grueling positional struggle. Every meter of Flemish soil had to be taken at the cost of dozens of lives. Of particular difficulty were the German fortifications in the Polygon Wood area, a system of bunkers and machine gun nests connected by underground passages. French units, operating on the right flank of the British, also encountered fierce resistance on the approaches to the village of Passchendaele, a small settlement that would soon become a symbol of the entire battle. The British Expeditionary Force arrived on the Flemish theatre of war with a reputation as a professional but small army. By 1917, the situation had changed dramatically. A mass army of over 2 million soldiers was already fighting in the fields of Flanders. The core of these forces consisted of volunteers from Kitchener's army, citizens who responded to the famous call of the Minister of War, "Your country needs you." The British Army in Flanders was organized into 5 field armies, each of which included several corps. A distinctive feature of the British Expeditionary Force was its imperial nature. Canadians, Australians, New Zealanders, Indians, and South Africans fought shoulder to shoulder with the British. These contingents often demonstrated exceptional combat effectiveness, especially the Australian and Canadian Corps, which earned a reputation as elite assault units. The armament of British infantry was based on the Lee-Enfield rifle, a reliable and rapid-firing weapon that allowed an experienced marksman to make up to 30 aimed shots per minute. Machine gun crews were armed with heavy Vickers machine guns and lighter Lewis guns, which provided impressive firepower. By 1917, British artillery had become one of the most powerful on the Western Front. Heavy howitzers, capable of destroying German concrete fortifications, played a special role. The British forces were commanded by Field Marshal Douglas Haig, a controversial figure in military history. He was criticized for his conservative thinking and willingness to sacrifice thousands of lives for minimal tactical successes. At the same time, it was Haig who managed to transform a small professional army into a powerful military machine capable of resisting German military might. The tactics of British troops in Flanders evolved from primitive frontal attacks to more complex combined operations. A key element became the creeping barrage, a method in which infantry advanced directly behind a moving wall of artillery shell bursts. This allowed soldiers to reach German positions before the enemy had time to occupy defensive structures after the shelling ceased. An innovation was the use of tanks, first used en masse by the British at the Battle of Cambrai in November 1917. However, in Flanders, the effectiveness of these machines proved limited due to the marshy terrain. The British command paid special attention to engineering troops. Sappers dug multi-kilometer tunnels under German positions, laid mines, built roads through swamps, and erected fortifications. It was British engineers who prepared and detonated 19 giant mines under Messines Ridge in June 1917, an operation that is still considered one of the greatest achievements of military engineering. British military medicine also underwent revolutionary changes. The system for evacuating the wounded included field dressing stations, field hospitals, and rear medical facilities. Ambulance trains played a special role, transporting the seriously wounded to port cities, from where they were evacuated to England. Despite all efforts, the losses of the British Expeditionary Force in Flanders were horrific. In the Third Battle of Ypres alone, they amounted to over 200,000 people. French troops entered the Flanders offensive burdened by recent upheavals. Following the catastrophic failure of the Nivelle offensive in the spring of 1917, army morale was severely undermined. A wave of mutinies, sweeping through many units, forced the French command to reconsider its strategy. General Pétain, who replaced Nivelle as commander-in-chief, adopted a more cautious approach, relying on artillery rather than massed infantry assaults. In Flanders, French units occupied the right flank of the Allied offensive. The 1st French Corps, under the command of General Antoine, was positioned south of the British lines and was tasked with providing protection against potential German counterattacks from the south. French military doctrine by this point had undergone significant changes. Abandoning the concept of attack at all costs, the French transitioned to a methodical advance tactic based on overwhelming artillery superiority. French artillery was considered among the best in the world. The famous 75mm field guns, nicknamed quick-firers, could fire up to 15 rounds per minute, creating a dense curtain of fire. In Flanders, the French also extensively used heavy artillery, 105mm and 155mm howitzers, capable of destroying German concrete fortifications. A distinctive feature of the French approach was the active use of aerial reconnaissance for adjusting artillery fire. French pilots daily flew dozens of reconnaissance missions, photographing German positions. This allowed for highly accurate strikes against key enemy defensive installations. Interaction with British forces was not always smooth. Differences in military doctrines, the language barrier, and a certain rivalry between commands created difficulties in coordinating action. However, the common threat and the need for joint efforts to achieve success compelled the Allies to find compromises. French infantry was characterized by high maneuverability and flexibility. Instead of the dense battle formations typical of the start of the war, the French now advanced in small groups, actively using terrain features for cover. Each platoon included machine gun crews armed with Chauchat light machine guns. Not the most reliable, but sufficiently effective infantry support weapons. Colonial troops, Zouaves, tirailleurs, and Moroccan riflemen played a special role in French units. These units were often used for the most difficult tasks and were renowned for their steadfastness in defense and decisiveness in attack. In Flanders, Algerian and Senegalese riflemen repeatedly distinguished themselves in repelling German counterattacks. The German defense in Flanders was a true masterpiece of military engineering. By 1917, the Germans had created a system of fortifications here that seemed virtually impregnable. Unlike the primitive trenches of the war's initial period, the defensive positions were a complex network of deeply echeloned fortifications, stretching for tens of kilometers in depth. German engineers skillfully utilized the features of the Flemish landscape, turning every hill, grove, and stream into an element of defense. The core of this system consisted of 3 lines of defense, each of which included several rows of trenches. The forward line, which bore the brunt of the enemy's initial assault, was relatively lightly fortified. The German command understood that any structures would be destroyed under massive artillery fire. Primarily observation posts and forward machine gun nests were located here. The main forces were concentrated in the second line of defense, located 2 to 3 kilometers from the front line. It was here that concrete bunkers, capable of withstanding hits from heavy-caliber shells, were situated. These fortifications, known as blockhouses, were positioned to provide crossfire on all approaches. Particularly impressive were the Menin Gate-type bunkers, reinforced concrete structures with walls up to 2 meters thick, armed with heavy machine guns and light artillery. The third line of defense served as the last stand and a base for counterattacks. Artillery positions, ammunition depots, and reserves were located here. All 3 lines were connected by an extensive network of communication trenches, allowing for rapid transfer of reinforcements to threatened sectors. German positions were literally riddled with MG-8 machine guns, dubbed mowers by the Allies. These deadly machines, capable of firing up to 550 rounds per minute, were positioned to create continuous zones of fire. A single machine gun with a well-trained crew could halt the advance of an entire company. In Flanders, the Germans first massively employed a new type of defensive structure: steel cupolas. These small, dome-shaped shelters, virtually imperceptible on the ground, provided protection for 1 or 2 observers or machine gunners. After artillery preparation, when British infantry advanced, these steel cupolas came to life, spewing deadly fire into the flank of the attackers. A tactical innovation of the German army was the concept of elastic defense, developed by General Erich Ludendorff. Instead of holding forward positions at all costs, German troops were instructed to retreat to pre-prepared lines if necessary, to avoid heavy losses from artillery fire. Then, when the attacking enemy was exhausted, a powerful counterattack by fresh reserves followed. This tactic proved extremely effective against British attacks in Flanders. When discussing the Battle of Flanders, one often forgets about those on whose land this tragedy unfolded: the Belgians. A small nation caught between the grindstones of great powers, it displayed astonishing resilience in defending its homeland. The Belgian army, numbering around 150,000 by 1917, held the northern sector of the front along the Isère River. Under the command of King Albert I, who refused to leave the country and personally led the troops, the Belgians turned the flooded plains of Flanders into an insurmountable barrier to the German advance. Engineering units opened the sluice gates and flooded vast areas, creating a water barrier up to 2 kilometers wide. In these extremely difficult conditions, Belgian soldiers fought with exceptional courage, holding on to the last shred of their territory. the civilian population of Flanders played a special role in the Belgian resistance. Thousands of local residents who remained in the combat zone became the eyes and ears of the Allied armies. An extensive network of underground informants transmitted information about German troop movements, artillery positions, and supply depots. Many Flemish farmers, risking their lives, sheltered downed Allied pilots and helped them cross the front line. The women of Flanders showed no less bravery. They worked as nurses in field hospitals, organized aid points for refugees, and supported soldiers at the front. The famous Edith Cavell, a British nurse working in Belgium, helped hundreds of Allied soldiers escape from occupied territories before she was captured by the Germans and executed. Her martyrdom became a symbol of Belgian resistance. However, the war brought unspeakable suffering to the civilian population of Flanders. Tens of thousands of people were forced to leave their homes, becoming refugees. Those who remained lived under constant artillery shelling, in conditions of severe food and medicine shortages. Many towns and villages in Flanders were completely wiped off the face of the earth. Ypres, once a prosperous center of the textile industry with magnificent medieval buildings, was reduced to a pile of ruins. The fate of the children of Flanders was particularly harsh. Deprived of the opportunity for normal education, often separated from their parents, they grew up amidst the horrors of war. Many of them became messengers and assistants in hospitals. Some even joined underground resistance groups. A tragic symbol of the suffering of the Belgian people was the fate of Yvonne Verdonk, a 12-year-old girl from Passchendaele who kept a diary during the battle. Her simple but poignant entries about daily life under bombardment became an important historical document, showing the war through the eyes of a child. The weather in Flanders was always an unpredictable and formidable adversary. But in the autumn of 1917, it transformed into a true ally of the German army. The torrential rains, characteristic of this region, began in late July and practically did not cease until November. The sky over the Flemish fields seemed to open up, pouring tons of water onto the shell-torn earth. Meteorologists would later call this autumn one of the rainiest on record in Western Europe. For soldiers on both sides, these weather conditions became a trial worse than enemy fire. The clay soil of Flanders quickly turned into a viscous swamp. Artillery bombardments destroyed the drainage systems that had existed here for centuries. Groundwater, finding no outlet, rose to the surface, turning shell craters into deadly traps. There were recorded cases where wounded soldiers, falling into such pits, drowned in liquid mud before medics could reach them. British infantryman Siegfried Sassoon wrote in his memoirs, "We were not fighting against Germans, we were fighting against mud." Movement in such conditions became almost impossible. Soldiers had to carry up to 50 kilograms of equipment, which became even heavier in the rain. A soaked greatcoat weighed like a lead shell. Each step required incredible effort. Feet sank into the mud up to the knee. There are known cases where soldiers literally lost their boots, sucked in by the swamp, and continued to walk barefoot through the icy slush. For artillery, conditions were even worse. Guns weighing several tons sank into the softened earth, making their movement impossible. Horses attempting to pull out stuck cannons themselves drowned in the mire. Supplying forward positions became a logistics nightmare. Trucks could not pass on the broken roads. Pack animals and human porters had to be used, who trudged for hours knee-deep in mud, delivering ammunition and provisions to the front line. Many of them did not return, struck down by a stray shell or a sniper's bullet. The German command skillfully used the weather conditions to their advantage. Their defensive positions were located on high ground, where water at least partially drained away. The British, however, had to advance through lowlands that had turned into real lakes of liquid mud. The wounded suffered particularly. In conditions of constant dampness, even minor injuries quickly became inflamed. Gangrene became commonplace. Medics worked in tents, flooded by rain, ankle-deep in mud. Soaked bandages, the inability to maintain cleanliness. All this led to high mortality among the wounded. Cold added to the suffering. By October, temperatures dropped below 10 degrees, and soaked clothing provided no protection. Trench foot, a painful condition caused by prolonged exposure of the feet to cold water, affected thousands of soldiers. Many had to have their blackened toes amputated. The cost of the Battle of Flanders was not measured solely in captured territories or strategic heights. Human lives became the main currency of this bloody confrontation. The statistics of casualties are shocking even a century later. Over 4 months of fighting, the British Army lost more than 240,000 men, killed, wounded, and missing. French losses amounted to about 120,000, Belgian, 30,000. Germany lost approximately 200,000 soldiers. In just one day, on October 12, 1917, more than 13,000 British soldiers died in the offensive on Passchendaele. An entire generation of young men disappeared in the mud of the Flemish fields. For every 5 meters of recaptured territory, the British paid with the life of one soldier. Such a price for victory posed a tormenting question to the command about the expediency of continuing the offensive. The moral state of the troops steadily deteriorated. In letters home, soldiers no longer wrote about a swift victory. They begged for survival. Middle-ranking officers increasingly reported cases of self-inflicted wounds and desertion. Cases of shell shock became more frequent, a mental disorder caused by continuous artillery shelling and the horrors of war. The medical support of the Battle of Flanders became a real test for military field medicine. The system for evacuating the wounded was organized on the principle of echelonment. Field dressing stations operated at the front line, providing first aid. Medics transported the wounded there, one of the most dangerous and heroic professions in war. Armed only with stretchers and bags of bandages, these people carried the injured from the battlefield under hurricane fire. The next link was field hospitals, located several kilometers from the front line. Urgent operations were performed there. Bleeding was stopped and wounds were treated. Under constant shelling, a shortage of medicines and staff, doctors had to work 18 to 20 hours without a break. The seriously wounded were evacuated further to the rear, to stationary hospitals located in the coastal cities of Belgium and northern France. From there, they were transported to England on hospital ships. The Flanders operation led to revolutionary changes in military medicine. For the first time, mobile X-ray machines were widely used, allowing quick detection of shrapnel in the body of the wounded. Surgeons mastered new methods of wound treatment, including washing with antiseptic solutions and delayed suturing. Canadian Dr. Lawrence Bruce Robertson first applied direct blood transfusion in the field, which saved thousands of lives. Gas attacks posed a particular problem. The Germans actively used mustard gas, Ypres, in Flanders, named after its first application site, the city of Ypres. This substance caused terrible chemical burns to the skin and mucous membranes. Special gas hospitals were created to treat the affected, with specific protocols for decontamination and treatment. The Battle of Flanders became not only a test of human endurance, but also a testing ground for new types of weaponry. World War I accelerated technological evolution, and many deadly inventions received their baptism of fire on the fields of Flanders. One of the most terrifying innovations was chemical weapons. Although gas attacks had been used since 1915, it was in Flanders that German troops first massively employed mustard gas, Ypirite. This substance, named after its first application site, the city of Ypres, caused excruciating chemical burns to the skin and respiratory tract. Unlike chlorine, from which one could protect oneself with simple masks, Ypirite penetrated clothing and acted with a delay. Symptoms appeared several hours after contact. New model gas masks with activated charcoal became an obligatory part of every soldier's equipment. Even horses received special protective masks, which gave the battlefields an even more surreal appearance. Another technological breakthrough was the widespread use of aviation. While at the beginning of the war, airplanes were primarily used for reconnaissance, by 1917 they had transformed into formidable offensive weapons. British Handley Page bombers regularly attacked German rear targets, striking railway junctions and depots. German Albatross and Fokker fighters attempted to intercept them, leading to fierce aerial battles over the Flemish fields. Artillery also underwent revolutionary changes. The British first applied the tactic of artillery barrages using precise mathematical calculations. Special meteorological services took into account wind direction, humidity, and air temperature to adjust firing. Sound rangers allowed for the highly accurate determination of German battery locations by the sound of their shots. The innovative use of observation balloons, ascending to an altitude of up to 2 kilometers, was also noteworthy. Observers used them to adjust artillery fire in real time, transmitting information via field telephone. However, the most revolutionary weapons of the Battle of Flanders were tanks. These armored vehicles, first employed by the British on the Somme in 1916, were significantly improved by the Battle of Flanders. New Mark IV and Mark V models had improved cross-country capability and more reliable armor. Unfortunately, the swampy terrain of Flanders limited their effectiveness. Many vehicles got stuck in the mud, becoming easy targets for German artillery. The Germans, initially underestimating the tank threat, quickly developed anti-tank measures. Special armor-piercing K-Patron bullets and light anti-tank guns allowed them to hit British tanks from a safe distance. Technological innovations even affected infantry weapons. Light Lewis and show-shot machine guns allowed small groups of soldiers to create a high density of fire. Mills hand grenades with a reliable time fuse became standard weapons for assault groups. German troops actively used flamethrowers, a weapon that caused panic and fear in the enemy ranks. The evolution of weaponry in Flanders changed the very nature of war, making it even more deadly and impersonal. Man became increasingly vulnerable in the face of mechanized death. The fields of Flanders became not just a place of bloody battles, they transformed into a powerful symbol of national unity for two leading Entente powers. For Great Britain and France, this battle acquired an almost sacred meaning, becoming part of the national myth of resilience in the face of unbearable trials. In the post-war years, British society experienced a profound identity crisis. The loss of an entire generation of young men, economic difficulties, and the collapse of imperial ambitions demanded a new unifying symbol. Flanders, with its red poppies, which became an emblem of remembrance for the fallen, perfectly suited this role. Annual commemorative ceremonies at the Cenotaph in London and at the Menin Gate in Ypres transformed into rituals of national unity, where the king, politicians, and ordinary citizens stood shoulder to shoulder in a moment of silence. In British literature and art, the image of Flanders took center stage. The poem In Flanders Fields by Canadian military doctor John McCrae became a cult text, known to every schoolchild. The lines, "In Flanders Fields the poppies blow, between the crosses, row on row," turned into a universal code of memory for the Great War. Artists such as Paul Nash and Christopher Nevinson created poignant canvases depicting the ruined Flemish landscapes. These works became a visual embodiment of national trauma and resilience. For France, Flanders also became a symbol of national rebirth. After the war, the country was exhausted materially and morally. The northern departments lay in ruins. Millions of Frenchmen did not return from the front. Under these conditions, the government of the Third Republic consciously shaped the image of Flanders as a place where the French soldier displayed the best national qualities: resilience, self-sacrifice, and loyalty to duty. In French cultural memory, Flanders occupied a special place, thanks to the literary works of Henri Barbusse and Roland d'Orgelet. Their novels Under Fire and Wooden Crosses, based on personal combat experiences, created a powerful image of the Flemish fields as a place of national martyrdom and, at the same time, the triumph of the French spirit. Both states actively used the memory of Flanders to strengthen national unity during the interwar period. School history textbooks described in detail the heroism of soldiers who fought in the mud of the Flemish fields. Veterans of the battle received special status and respect in society. State ceremonies and memorials constantly reminded citizens of the sacrifice made in the name of the nation. For the German command, the lessons of Flanders were critical. The defeat in World War I did not prevent Germany's military theorists from thoroughly analyzing the experience of positional warfare. General Erich Ludendorff, one of the main architects of German defense in Flanders, in his post-war memoirs, described in detail the concept of, quote, zero. This tactic, which involved a temporary retreat from forward positions under artillery fire, followed by a counterattack, became the cornerstone of German defensive doctrine. In the interwar period, German military theorists such as Hans von Seeckt and Heinz Guderian studied the experience of Flanders with particular attention. They came to a revolutionary conclusion: positional warfare must be avoided at all costs. Static fronts, similar to those that emerged in Flanders, inevitably lead to the exhaustion of resources and human potential. The answer to this challenge was the concept of blitzkrieg, lightning warfare, using armored formations for deep breakthroughs into the enemy's rear. German strategists realized that the main lesson of Flanders was the understanding of the futility of frontal attacks on fortified positions. Instead, they should look for weak points in the enemy's defense, concentrate forces in narrow sectors, and strive for the operational encirclement of enemy groupings. These ideas were reflected in the Wehrmacht's military doctrine of the 1930s. Polish military analysts also carefully studied the experience of Flanders, but came to different conclusions. Poland, which gained independence after World War I, found itself caught between two potential adversaries, Germany and Soviet Russia. Under these circumstances, the Polish command saw positional defense not as a problem, but as a possible solution. Marshal Józef Pilsudski, the de facto leader of the Polish state, believed that in the event of war, Poland should prolong hostilities as much as possible, creating a system of fortifications modeled after those that existed in Flanders. This would buy time until the intervention of Western allies. Polish military engineers studied the design of German bunkers and blockhouses used in Flanders, adapting these ideas to create their own fortified areas. Special attention was paid to the organization of echeloned defense, with several lines of fortifications connected by communication trenches. However, financial constraints prevented Poland from fully implementing these plans. By September 1939, the Polish system of fortifications remained fragmented and unable to withstand a massive Wehrmacht offensive. The tragic paradox was that the German command, having learned the lessons of Flanders, developed a strategy that relied precisely on avoiding positional battles. The blitzkrieg applied against Poland was a direct consequence of the analysis of the mistakes of World War I. The Wehrmacht's tank wedges bypassed pockets of resistance, not engaging in protracted battles for fortified areas. Aviation struck communications, paralyzing the Polish army's ability to maneuver. The war that the Poles planned to wage for months ended in a few weeks. The Russian military command closely followed events on the Western Front, especially the protracted positional battles in Flanders. Despite the geographical distance, the lessons of this bloody battle were of immense importance to the Russian army, which also faced the problem of positional warfare on the Eastern Front. General Alexei Brusilov, one of the most talented Russian military leaders, meticulously analyzed military attaché reports on British and German tactics in Flanders. He was particularly interested in the experience of breaking through fortified enemy positions. In his memoirs, Brusilov wrote, "The Flanders meat grinder showed the futility of frontal attacks on prepared positions. We must seek other ways to overcome the positional stalemate." Unlike the Western Front, where the line of contact was dense throughout its length, the Eastern Front had a significantly greater length with a lower troop density. This created potential opportunities for maneuver that the Allies in Flanders did not have. Russian military theorists, such as Professor Alexander Svechin of the General Staff Academy, developed the concept of an echeloned breakthrough, an offensive on several sectors of the front with subsequent concentration of forces in the direction of greatest success. The Russian command was particularly interested in the artillery preparation tactics used in Flanders. The British method of the creeping barrage, a gradually moving wall of artillery explosions followed by infantry, was studied in detail by Russian artillerymen. General Nikolai Golovin, who headed the military art department of the General Staff Academy, proposed adapting this tactic to Russian specifics: fewer guns, but of a larger caliber. In 1916, Brusilov successfully applied many of these ideas during the famous Brusilov Offensive. Instead of concentrating all forces on one sector, as the British did in Flanders, he struck simultaneously in several directions, preventing the Austro-Hungarian command from determining the direction of the main blow. This led to a breakthrough of the front to a depth of up to 120 kilometers, a result that the Allies on the Western Front could only dream of. However, the revolutionary events of 1917 prevented the Russian army from fully developing these tactical innovations. The demoralization of troops, desertion, and the collapse of discipline made it impossible to conduct complex offensive operations. Nevertheless, the theoretical developments of Russian military specialists were not in vain. After the Civil War, the Red Army Command carefully studied the experience of the First World War, including the lessons of Flanders. Mikhail Tukhachevsky, Vladimir Triandafilov, and other Soviet military theorists of the 1920s and 30s developed the concept of deep operation, an offensive aimed at the simultaneous destruction of the entire tactical depth of the enemy's defense. This theory was a direct response to the positional stalemate of which Flanders was a symbol. Particular attention was paid to the mechanization of the army. Soviet military theorists concluded that only the massive use of tanks in combination with air support could overcome fortified enemy defenses without unacceptable casualties. These ideas were reflected in the creation of large tank formations, mechanized corps, capable of independent operations to a great depth. Thus, the tragic experience of Flanders was not in vain for Russian military thought. The lessons learned helped to form a new military doctrine, which was subsequently successfully applied during the Great Patriotic War. The blood shed in the mud of the Flemish fields indirectly contributed to the development of military art, which, in the future, made it possible to avoid a repetition of similar bloody positional battles. The legacy of the Battle of Flanders extends far beyond its immediate military outcomes. This bloody drama on the marshy plains of Belgium changed the very understanding of modern warfare and had a profound impact on 20th-century military science. The fields of Flanders became a peculiar laboratory where military theorists from all countries sought an answer to the main question: how to overcome the positional stalemate. The main lesson of Flanders was the understanding of the futility of frontal assaults on fortified positions. The British command paid for this lesson with hundreds of thousands of lives. After the war, military academies worldwide studied detailed maps of the Flanders offensives, analyzing the reasons for their failure. The concept of massive infantry attacks, which dominated military thinking before World War I, was finally discredited. In the interwar period, many countries drew opposing conclusions from the experience of Flanders. French strategists, traumatized by the enormous losses, opted for defense, which led to the creation of the Maginot Line, a grandiose system of fortifications on the border with Germany. This approach reflected the deep psychological trauma of the French nation, which at all costs needed to avoid a repeat of the Flanders slaughter. German military theorists, on the contrary, focused on finding ways to overcome the positional stalemate. Heinz Guderian, who studied the experience of Flanders, came to the conclusion that it was necessary to create powerful, mobile formations capable of rapidly breaking through enemy defenses and developing success in depth. These ideas formed the basis of the Blitzkrieg concept, which allowed Germany to avoid a repeat of positional battles at the beginning of World War II. The experience of Flanders had a huge impact on the development of military technology. It was here that it became evident that the future lay with mechanized armies. Tanks, first used en masse by the British, despite limited success in Flanders, demonstrated their potential. In the interwar period, all great powers invested significant resources in the development of armored forces. Aviation, another technological breakthrough of World War I, after Flanders began to be considered a strategic tool. Proponents of air warfare, such as the Italian Giulio Douhet, argued that massive bombings could break the enemy's will to resist, thereby avoiding bloody ground battles. These ideas found tragic embodiment in World War II. Flanders also changed the understanding of the role of artillery. While before this battle, cannons were primarily seen as a means of supporting infantry, they now became an independent branch of service, capable of solving strategic tasks. The concept of an artillery offensive, developed in Flanders, was refined and applied in many conflicts of the 20th century. Today, the fields of Flanders, once soaked with the blood of thousands of soldiers, have transformed into peaceful agricultural lands and memorial complexes. The heights of Passchendaele, for which fierce battles were fought, are now adorned with neat rows of white crosses and obelisks. Time has almost erased the scars of war, but the memory of those events is carefully preserved in numerous museums and memorials. In the city of Ypres, completely rebuilt after the destruction, the last post is played every evening at 8 o'clock, a moving ceremony held continuously since 1928. Under the arches of the Menin Gate, the city's firefighters play a mournful melody on trumpets in memory of the fallen. Even during the German occupation in the years of the Second World War, this tradition was not interrupted. The ceremony was held in England, in a camp for Belgian refugees. The Flanders Fields Museum in Ypres has become one of the most visited military history museums in Europe. Fragments of trenches are recreated here, thousands of artifacts found on the battlefields are presented, and interactive exhibits allow visitors to feel the atmosphere of those terrible days. The Hall of Remembrance makes a special impression, where the names of almost 55,000 soldiers of the British Empire, whose bodies were never found, are carved into the walls. To this day, the Flemish soil holds the deadly legacy of war. Annually, sappers defuse about 160 tons of unexploded shells that farmers find in their fields. Locals call this the iron harvest. The earth seems to push out fragments of the past. The lessons of Flanders remain relevant for modern military science. The experience of positional warfare is studied in military academies around the world as an example of how not to conduct combat operations. The concept of deep breakthroughs using mobile armored formations, developed as a response to the Flemish stalemate, remains the basis of modern tactics for ground operations. Geopolitically, the Battle of Flanders reminds us of the fragility of peace in Europe and the danger of escalating regional conflicts. Belgium, twice a battlefield in world wars, is now home to the headquarters of NATO and the European Union, organizations created precisely to prevent the recurrence of such tragedies. In the collective memory of European peoples, Flanders occupies a special place. For the British, the red poppy remains the main symbol of remembrance for the fallen. Every November, millions of people pin paper poppies to their clothes as a sign of respect for those who died. For the French, Flanders symbolizes the steadfastness of the nation in the face of trials. In Germany, this battle is perceived as a tragic example of the senselessness of war and the price of imperial ambitions. Today, the Flemish fields attract thousands of descendants of those who fought and died here. They come to honor the memory of their ancestors and feel a connection with history. Many bring a handful of their native soil to leave it on graves or at memorials, a symbolic gesture connecting worlds separated by war.